In this real-side experience, I was in an observing witness capacity. I would not actually be involved in what transpired in any shape or form. Sometimes in this role as the observer, although I may not be participating in the unfolding situations, the other individuals in the experience can still see me, interact with me, speak with me, and yes, on a few occasions, decide to attack me also. There was an experience a while back where I was recording events. It was a kind of a mad, high-tech virtual reality war of mayhem, and the characters there could not only see me, but could attack me also. Some chose to do so, but I would simply tell them I was just there, in a recording of events capacity, and that their attacks on me, although it was possible they could assail me, would be fruitless, and this was enough to keep them at bay. But here, in this real-side experience, I was observing, but almost as though, in my own little bubble, that all others could neither interact, nor perceive, or be aware of my presence. I was standing in a house. On the first floor of it. It was not my own, but rather a venue that had been selected for a party or gathering of some kind. At least, this is what the individual that now knocked on the door had been led to believe. As I watched, another individual opened the door, and my impressions were that this host, the one receiving this visitor, was a guide. For real guides have a kind of all-ears, aliveness, real signature about them. A kind of true reality, standing real with life sense about them. There was another person here also, but one that seemed to be just observing. The guide would open the door to this visiting individual and welcome him in. The visiting man was very delighted to be here, and was carrying a few food items, for he felt it prudent to contribute to what he thought was a party. Although able to see and interact with the guide, I had the sense he was unaware of the host's credentials, that he didn't realize him to be a guide, at least at this moment. He also was unaware of the presence of the third individual, who, as I said, was simply observing. It was a sort of deception in a way, but one for this individual's benefit. for the guide would inform him that there was no party. There were, in fact, no others to be joining them here, and that the entire scene had been set up to entice the individual here for an entirely different purpose. What we have here is a man in his early stages of becoming more aware, taking his first tentative steps into the unknown and the reality of his real awareness and the all is. Hence his inability to recognize the guide, for yes, the guides do not always appear as they are generally depicted in the new presentation pictures. Very often they will be present in our real side experiences, but take rather the role of an extra in the scenes they had created or found for the individual's demonstration. The guides don't want too much focus placed upon them, but rather the attention be on that which they are trying to convey through the experience, the nugget of precious awareness bolstering gold they are attempting to relay. With the guides stepping into the background, the individual may assume then the absence of guides in the experience, which has the individual operating more from a free will position that isn't influenced by the presence of others. If the guides are in the room, we will be on our best behaviour in accordance with what makes sense with the whole of life. But with no guides present, there is more likelihood of the student scrawling words on the chalkboard, or throwing paper airplanes around the classroom. In other words, it is a kind of test of the individual's intent and sincerity to determine if their focus is maintained, despite the circumstances or the seeming absence of watching guides. Sometimes, however, the guides can be present and play an apparent and key role in the experience, but they may not be recognized for who they are. Over time, you begin to determine the guides based more on their telltale all-is signatures rather than their appearances, as they do not always assume the forms that we have come to know. Paul Twitchell, as an example, delights in taking the forms of movie actors, and I have encountered him in various forms such as these, from Robert De Niro to Jack Nicholson. The man in this experience could not recognize this guide, and because his journey to the is had only begun, the guides were doing all manner of things and everything feasible to get his attention and show him what they were able, according to what the individual agreed to, what he was willing to see and become aware of. In this case, then, the house was very much belonging to this man, as houses tend to represent the created consciousness, the personal self on the real side. That they were on the ground floor indicated that the want to become more aware, even in its early stages, was very much agreed upon and embraced by the personal self of this individual, as the first floor of houses, where this party was supposed to be held, represents the personal conscious self in creation. The man had evidently been out and about on the real side, exploring, having adventures, but always with the process of becoming more aware is the serious business of tapline, agreement, attachment, removal, the facing of the personal self, and moving beyond the restriction of it. It was as though this man had been very engrossed in his adventures, and the guides had let him be for a few moments, but the time had come for some tapline and personal self-addressing work, and this party had indeed been a ruse to bring the man back to his personal self-house, where all the facing of the created self must be done. For as we regard the personal self-house, with all its capacity for subconscious storage, we can become very objective to it, as opposed to being absorbed into the illusion of its fabricated reality. Objectivity that makes for a more effective process of facing the self, making it surely easier to face everything we have created and made a part of our created selves. This objective indifference would be the real awareness, viewing its personal creation. The third individual in the house, then, I would suggest, was the real self, the real awareness of the man whose house this was. And evidently, the reason the man couldn't see this third individual then was due to the fact that he hadn't recognized his real awareness self as yet. As I said, it was clearly early days for this man, one step at a time, but he seemed the adventurous, risk-taking sort, as he had been exploring the real side beyond his house, where many would have to be encouraged to leave the real side personal houses. He had to be encouraged back, in fact, for tapline detail, and so the guide took the man by the arm and escorted him to another part of his personal self-house. That the man had returned was agreement to the assistance of the guide, even though it had been a beneficial ruse to bring him home, as it were, and on the guide informing him that there was no party in fact, it seems the man began to realize that this host who had received him was a real guide. I could see the man's dawning realization of this fact. As the deciders of our experience, we cannot be assisted by the guides unless we agree. Free will is undeniable, and at any time this man could have refused the assistance and returned to his real side adventures, which we might categorize as thrill-seeking to an extent. And I've surely been guilty of this myself, as I always adored the exciting real side escapades. But anyway, agreement was maintained to the guide's assistance, and so the guide could continue to facilitate this man's process as he led him to another part of the man's house. The real awareness self of this individual would wait patiently where he was, and not feature in this experience again, at least not as a separate character, but obviously the real awareness self always would be with the personal self, for it is the real you that decides and animates the created self, wherever in creation your personal self might be, through all its 5 bodies and life levels. The part of the house that the guide led the man to was clearly part of the subconscious, the place where all our tapline agreements and attachments are located, that mostly we are unconscious to, hence the necessity to be shown that which we are unconsciously holding to, that which makes up our created consciousness, that until revealed, addressed, and decided on its release, cause and effect binds us to creation, and endless continuous lifetimes. Very often, I find that tapline removing comes with the experiences, the scenes, settings, and lifetimes where the tapline was forged, even if what is seen makes no sense. For the important aspect is the tapline addressing and removing, and not necessarily the situation and lifetimes where the taplines were forged. It was no different for this man, as the house faded away, and he found himself in a new setting. I was accompanying the guide and this man still, yet maintaining my observing capacity and not involved in any way, and the man would never see me, though the guide would surely have known of my presence. For undoubtedly the real guide was the one who had invited me to observe. This particular taplining removal had taken the man to a former lifetime, in who knew what dimension or time frame or position in life. The particulars were all rather incidental in the face of the overall purpose of this experience for him, that of tapline removal. Even though the scene was very clear, all the individuals that were present here at first looked very ethereal to this man, like ghostly apparitions, and although he could see them, they could not see him. He would pass his hand through their wispy, insubstantial bodies like vapour, and look at his hand in surprise, as it met no resistance. It was as though it took a few moments for him to be fully present here, and as the moments passed, the people became more solid, and lost their apparitional appearances.